Crystal's sangria splashed across my cream silk dress like a crimson accusation, and her words cut even deeper. Now you look as cheap as you are. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply smiled, walked straight over to the bride, and whispered something in her ear that made her face turn as white as her wedding gown. 5 minutes later, Crystal was the one everyone was staring at. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. And now, let me tell you how we got to that delicious moment of justice because, honey, this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. My name is Margaret Thompson, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 64 years old, and I truly thought I'd seen every kind of family drama imaginable. I was wrong. The morning of Tyler's wedding started off sweet and simple. My grandson, my precious boy, whose father had died 3 years earlier in that terrible car accident, was finally marrying his college sweetheart, Sophia. I'd watched their relationship grow from awkward teenage dating into this beautiful, steady love. And despite everything that had happened with my daughter-in-law Crystal, since my son David passed away, I was determined to make this day perfect for Tyler. I chose my outfit carefully. A cream silk dress paired with a delicate pearl necklace David had given me for my 60th birthday. Looking back, I probably should have worn armor instead. Crystal had been shooting me that look all morning, the one that said I was somehow ruining her vision of the perfect wedding just by existing. You know the look. Every gesture calculated, every smile rehearsed, every word coated in sweetness just thick enough to hide the poison underneath. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Tyler looked so handsome in his navy suit, and Sophia was radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace gown. As I watched them exchange vows, my heart swelled with pride and grief all at once. David should have been there to walk his son down the aisle, to give that father of Avgram's speech, to see his boy become a man. Instead, it was just me in the front row, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue, while Crystal held court in the opposite corner, surrounded by her book club friends. During the cocktail hour, something strange caught my attention. Crystal kept pulling people aside for quiet, intense conversations. Her face was animated, almost concerned. Every time one of those conversations ended, the person would glance toward Sophia with expressions that ranged from surprise to outright disapproval. It reminded me of a wildfire, how quickly whispers can spread and destroy everything in their path. Still, I was enjoying myself too much to focus on Crystal's theatrics. I was catching up with old friends, watching Tyler beam with happiness. Besides, this kind of behavior was nothing new for Crystal. At every family gathering, she made sure she was the center of attention, always managing some crisis or another. What could she possibly be stirring up at her own son's wedding? The reception was held in the Garden Pavilion at Riverside Country Club, glowing with twinkling lights and white flowers that Sophia had arranged herself to save money. Sweet girl, always practical. I admired that, even if Crystal clearly didn't, I'd offered to help with the wedding expenses. But Tyler had politely declined. He and Sophia wanted to start their marriage debt-free. Smart kids. I was chatting with Sophia's parents, lovely people who owned a small accounting firm, downtown when Crystal appeared beside me like a bad rash. "Margaret," she said in that syrupy voice that always made my teeth ache, "have you met Tyler's college friends? They've been asking about the family." Something in her tone made my grandmother instincts flare, but I smiled and followed her to a group of young people gathered near the bar. "Everyone," Crystal announced with dramatic flair. "This is Tyler's grandmother, the one who's been so generous with her opinions about the wedding planning." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Generous with opinions. I'd barely said 2 words about the wedding, having learned years ago that any input from David's side of the family was unwelcome in Crystal's world. Yet here she was, painting me as the meddling mother-in-law in front of Tyler's friends. "Your grandson is lucky to have such an involved grandmother," one young man said politely, though I caught the subtle emphasis on involved. Clearly, he'd already heard Crystal's version of the story. "We all are," I replied carefully, shooting Crystal a look she returned with wide, innocent eyes. This was her specialty, making me look difficult while she played the long-suffering daughter-in-law. It was a performance she'd perfected over the years, and I'd learned how to survive it with minimal damage. As the reception continued, I began positioning myself near other conversations, pretending to admire the floral arrangements while quietly listening to what Crystal was telling people. And that's when I finally understood what she'd been doing all along. What I heard next made my blood run cold. She was deliberately spreading lies about Sophia's family, claiming that Robert had legal trouble in his past, and that Linda had struggled with substance abuse. Complete fabrications, delivered with just enough concern to sound believable. When dinner was served, I found myself seated at a table with distant relatives and family friends, the obvious overflow table despite being the groom's only surviving grandmother. Crystal, meanwhile, sat proudly at the head table, entertaining everyone with animated stories that had the whole group laughing. From my carefully chosen vantage point, I could see her gesturing toward Sophia again and again, her expression shifting between fake concern and something that looked disturbingly close to satisfaction. That's when it finally clicked. I understood exactly what she was doing and why. This wasn't casual gossip. This was deliberate character assassination, and it had a purpose. I excused myself and headed to the ladies' room, partly to gather my thoughts and partly to confirm what I suspected Crystal was up to. The bathroom was crowded with wedding guests fixing their makeup, and I overheard exactly what I feared. Just terrible for Tyler, one woman said. Crystal was telling us about the girl's family background. Who would have thought she'd hide something like that from him? Another woman nodded sympathetically. Prison time for tax evasion, wasn't it? And the mother's drinking problem. Poor Tyler, finding out on his wedding day. My hands curled into fists. Prison, drinking. I'd known Sophia's parents for 2 years. Robert and Linda Chen were the most mild-mannered, respectable people imaginable. Robert had worked as an accountant his entire career, and Linda taught elementary school. The most scandalous thing about them was Linda's habit of bringing homemade cookies to every gathering. I waited until the restroom cleared, then pulled out my phone and made a call I'd been dreading but preparing for. Patricia, it's Margaret Thompson. I need you to activate that investigation we discussed last month. Yes, tonight. Crystal's making her move. Patricia Winters, the forensic accountant I'd hired 6 weeks earlier, had been quietly building a case involving irregularities in Tyler's trust fund. When David died, I'd been named the original co-trustee, which gave me oversight rights that Crystal had conveniently failed to mention. When I began noticing discrepancies in the quarterly reports, I decided it was time to dig deeper. When I returned to the reception, I watched Crystal with new eyes. Every conversation, every concerned look, every sympathetic headshake was part of an elaborate performance meant to plant doubt about Sophia in the minds of everyone present. But I knew the real reason behind this smear campaign. Tyler's trust fund, his inheritance from his father, was worth nearly $600,000, and once he married, ownership would transfer to him and his spouse jointly. Crystal had been living very comfortably off the management fees and some creative accounting I was now documenting. She couldn't afford to lose control of that money to a so-called nobody from a modest family. As dinner progressed, Crystal became more animated, more reckless with her stories. She was clearly working toward something big. Grand finale, meant to permanently stain Sophia's reputation and prove she was unworthy of the Patterson family. Then Tyler stood to give his groom's speech, and Crystal saw her opening. She rose from her seat at the head table, sangria glass in hand, and began walking toward me across the pavilion. Her face was flushed with wine and triumph, and I could see she was ready for her final move. Margaret, she called out loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, I just want to thank you for being so understanding about everything we've learned tonight. I stood slowly, smoothing my cream silk dress, and smiled. Of course, Crystal, what exactly are you referring to? Her smile sharpened as she approached, the sangria glass held like a weapon. Conversations around us began to pause, people sensing something was about to happen. Oh, Crystal said sweetly, about Sophia's family situation. I'm sure it must be difficult for you, learning about the criminal background and all. She gestured vaguely toward the head table, where Sophia sat, looking confused by the sudden attention. Criminal background, I repeated, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. That's a very serious accusation. Crystal, are you saying you have documentation of criminal activity? Her smile flickered, just for a moment, but she pushed forward. Well, not documentation exactly, but Tyler deserves to know what kind of family he's marrying into. Some of us have been doing our research. Research, I echoed thoughtfully. How thorough of you. And what exactly did this research uncover? Crystal straightened her shoulders, clearly deciding that offense was her best defense. Robert Chen has a history of tax problems with the IRS, and Linda has struggled with alcohol addiction for years. The family has significant debt and financial instability, she said, pausing for effect. I thought Tyler should know before it's too late. The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler had stopped mid-sentence in his speech, staring at his stepmother with growing alarm. Sophia's face had gone pale, while her parents looked like they'd just been slapped. That's fascinating, I said calmly, because the Robert Chen I know just completed pro bono tax preparation for 50 low-income families last year, and has never had so much as a late filing. And Linda Chen has been the designated driver for her book club for 15 years because she doesn't drink alcohol at all. Crystal's face flushed red. You're defending them because you don't want to admit you were fooled too. People like that are very good at hiding their problems. People like what, Crystal? I asked. People who marry for money, she snapped, her composure finally cracking. Gold diggers who target wealthy families and then disappear with everything they can get their hands on. That's when she made her fatal mistake. Fueled by anger and frustration, Crystal drew back her arm and hurled her sangria straight at my cream silk dress. The red liquid splashed across the delicate fabric like blood, and her voice rang out across the silent pavilion. Now, you look as cheap as you are, defending these fortune hunters. The entire reception froze. Even the catering staff stood perfectly still. Crystal remained there, breathing hard, sangria dripping from her empty glass, clearly realizing she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. I looked down at my ruined dress, then slowly back up at Crystal, smiling in a way that made her take a step backward. Thank you, Crystal, I said quietly. You've just given me the perfect opening. Then I walked calmly to the head table where Sophia sat, utterly mortified. I leaned down and whispered in her ear loud enough for nearby tables to hear, but soft enough to feel intimate. Your new mother-in-law has been stealing from Tyler's trust fund for 3 years. I have the forensic accounting report in my purse, and the police are already investigating. Sophia's face went white as her wedding gown. She stared up at me in shock, then turned toward Tyler, who was still standing there, frozen, his speech notes trembling in his hand. What did you just tell her? Crystal demanded, storming toward us with the empty glass still clenched in her fist. I straightened and faced the assembled guests, my sangria-stained dress somehow giving me more authority instead of less. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting this beautiful celebration, but I believe there's been some confusion that needs to be cleared up. Tyler finally found his voice. Grandma, what's going on? What's going on, sweetheart? Is that your stepmother has been spreading malicious lies about your wife's family while systematically embezzling money from your trust fund? I reached into my evening purse and pulled out a folded document. This is a forensic accounting report showing that over the past 3 years, approximately $180,000 has been withdrawn from your trust fund, under what Crystal labeled management expenses. A collective gasp swept across the pavilion. Tyler's face shifted from confusion to realization, to fury in a matter of seconds. That's not true, Crystal shrieked. She's lying. She's a bitter old woman who can't stand that David chose me over his precious mother. Actually, I continued calmly, those so-called management expenses include lease payments for Crystal's Mercedes, a kitchen renovation costing $35,000, and 2 European vacations totaling $28,000. Tyler stared at Crystal, comprehension dawning. You told me the trust was underperforming. You said I should be grateful it hadn't lost more money in the market downturn. I was protecting that money, Crystal cried desperately, pointing at Sophia, from people exactly like her, gold diggers who marry for inheritance money. That's when Robert Chun, the mild-mannered accountant extraordinaire, stood up from his table and did something no one expected, including himself. He laughed, not a polite chuckle, but a full-bodied belly laugh that echoed through the silent pavilion. Ma'am, he said once he caught his breath, I hate to break it to you, but my daughter's trust fund is actually larger than your stepson's. We set it up when she turned 18, using proceeds from the sale of my family's accounting firm. The silence was so complete you could hear a pin drop. Then someone in the back began clapping slowly at first. Within seconds, half the reception was applauding Robert's perfect comeback. But I wasn't finished yet. 3 years of watching Crystal manipulate and control my family had led to this moment, and I intended to savor every second. There's more, I announced, pulling out a second document, one that made Crystal actually stumble backward. This, I said, holding up the paper, is a copy of the original trust agreement David set up for Tyler, the one Crystal told him was too complicated to understand. Tyler reached for the document with shaking hands. What does it say? It says, I replied, watching Crystal's face turn an interesting shade of gray, that as the surviving co-trustee, I retained full oversight, rights Crystal conveniently forgot to mention, and when evidence of financial misconduct is presented, I have the authority to freeze the account and demand a complete audit. Crystal's voice dropped to a whisper. You can't do that. Actually, I already did. This afternoon, after Patricia Winters completed her forensic investigation, I smiled at the wedding guests, who were now hanging on every word. You see, when my son David died, he made me co-trustee specifically to prevent this kind of situation. He knew Crystal had expensive tastes. Tyler was scanning the document now, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding, and finally to pure rage. This says the trust was worth $580,000 when Dad died. You told me it was only worth $400,000 after market losses. Market fluctuations, Crystal said weakly. Investment fees, management costs? Management costs? Sophia said quietly. That somehow paid for your lifestyle, while you told Tyler he needed to be more financially responsible. By now, the entire crowd was completely captivated. It was like watching a dramatic soap opera unfold in real time. Several guests had abandoned all pretense of politeness and were openly staring, wedding cake forgotten on their plates. Crystal straightened her shoulders, clearly deciding that offense was her best defense. Fine, she snapped. Yes, I used some of that money. I deserved it. Do you have any idea what I sacrificed for this family? What I gave up to raise Tyler after his mother died? You mean after you moved in on a grieving widower and his traumatized toddler? I asked pleasantly. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the fountain in the country club's main garden. Tyler's fork clattered onto his plate. What did you just say? Tyler, I said gently, realizing I'd just opened a door that could never be closed. Your father was devastated when your mother, Jennifer, died in that car accident. Crystal was David's secretary at the law firm. She took advantage of his grief and your need for care. Crystal's face shifted from gray to purple. That's not how it happened. David and I fell in love. We were meant to be together. You were his employee who saw an opportunity, I corrected firmly. And for 23 years, you positioned yourself as Tyler's devoted mother while systematically stealing from his inheritance. Tyler shot to his feet so fast his chair crashed backward. 23 years of lies. That's when we heard footsteps approaching the table, and Detective Williams appeared in his dark suit. Mrs. Patterson, he said calmly, we'd like to speak with you about some financial irregularities that have been reported. Detective Williams was polite but efficient as he explained the situation to the stunned wedding guests. My forensic accountant had been working with the police for the past 2 weeks, building a case, using the evidence I provided as co-trustee. Mrs. Patterson, the detective continued, we have documentation showing systematic withdrawals from Tyler Patterson's trust account without proper authorization, along with falsified quarterly reports provided to the beneficiary. This is ridiculous, Crystal shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that probably set off dogs in the neighborhood. I'm being accused of crimes at my own son's wedding because of a vindictive old woman's lies. Tyler stood slowly, his face set in a cold fury I had never seen before. My son's wedding, he repeated. My son. Crystal, I don't even know who you are anymore. I'm the woman who raised you, Crystal screamed, all pretense finally gone. I'm the one who took care of you when your precious Jennifer died. I'm the one who made this family work. You're the one who saw an opportunity and took it, Tyler replied quietly, and you've been taking ever since. Detective Williams stepped forward. Ma'am, we also have evidence of credit cards opened in Tyler's name without his knowledge, as well as a second mortgage taken out on property that wasn't legally yours to mortgage. No one was pretending to eat anymore. Phones were definitely out whether people were recording or texting updates to those who'd missed the spectacle. I couldn't tell. Crystal's book club friends had already begun gathering their purses, eager to distance themselves from the explosion. That property should have been mine anyway, Crystal snapped, her control completely gone. David would have left me everything if he'd had time to update his will properly. Actually, I said, pulling out yet another document, David did update his will 6 months before he died. He left the house to Tyler, with the understanding that you could live there until Tyler married, at which point you were required to move out and transfer full ownership to him. Tyler's jaw dropped. The house is mine. It has been for 3 years, I continued. Crystal has been collecting rental income from the tenant in the apartment, above the garage money, that legally belongs to you. That's when Crystal made her most desperate move. Yet, she turned toward the wedding guests, tears streaming down her face, her voice cracking with carefully calculated emotion. Please, she said, you have to understand. I loved David so much. I dedicated my entire adult life to his family. Tyler is like my own son. Everything I did was to protect him from people who would use him for his money. She pointed dramatically at Sophia. People exactly like her family. People who saw a trust fund and a wealthy family name and decided to cash in. And then Sophia surprised everyone. She stood up and calmly walked over to Crystal, stopping just inches from her. Sophia looked her straight in the eyes and spoke with a quiet dignity that instantly commanded the attention of everyone in the pavilion. Mrs. Patterson, she said clearly, her voice steady. I want you to know something. Tyler and I don't need his trust fund. We both have good jobs. We're debt-free, and we've saved enough to buy our own home. She paused, letting her words sink in among the guests who had been listening to Crystal's accusations all evening. But what you've done tonight isn't about money. It's about respect, honesty, and love, things you clearly know nothing about. Sophia's voice grew stronger. You've spent this entire wedding reception spreading lies about my family, claiming my father was a criminal and my mother was an addict. You've stolen money from Tyler for years while lecturing him about financial responsibility, and you've built your entire relationship with him on deception. Crystal opened her mouth to interrupt, but Sophia raised a hand. I'm not finished. You want to talk about people who marry for money? You're the one who moved in on a grieving widower and convinced him you were what his traumatized child needed. You're the one who's been living off money that wasn't yours for 3 years. You're the one who saw Tyler's wedding as a threat to your financial security and decided to destroy it rather than lose control. The applause started slowly, then grew into a full, genuine ovation. Even some of Crystal's book club friends were clapping, though they looked deeply embarrassed to be associated with her. Tyler stepped beside his wife and took her hand. Crystal, he said quietly, I want you to understand something. Sophia just defended her family and mine with more grace and dignity than you've shown in 23 years. That's what real class looks like. Crystal's face crumpled. Tyler, please, I'm your mother. I raised you. Doesn't that count for anything? Tyler looked at her for a long moment. I could see the little boy who had once loved her struggling with the man who now understood exactly who she was. Jennifer Walsh was my mother, he said finally. You were just the woman who convinced my grieving father that he needed help raising me, the woman who saw an opportunity and took it. Detective Williams stepped forward, handcuffs in hand. Mrs. Patterson, you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft. As he read Crystal her rights, she made one last desperate attempt to cling to control. You'll regret this, Tyler, she screamed as the handcuffs clicked shut. Without me, you're nothing. I made this family. I made you who you are. Tyler watched calmly as Detective Williams led her toward the pavilion exit. No, Crystal, he said quietly, you made me what you needed me to be. There's a difference. As the police car's taillights disappeared into the night, the wedding reception slowly began to come back to life. The band, who had stood frozen with their instruments for nearly an hour, tentatively began playing again. Conversations resumed in hushed tones as guests approached Tyler and Sophia to offer support and apologies for Crystal's behavior. I found myself standing with the newlyweds and Sophia's parents, all of us still trying to process what had just happened. Robert Chen shook his head in disbelief. In 30 years of accounting, I've seen family financial abuse, but never quite like this. To steal from your own stepson while accusing his wife's family of being gold diggers. That takes a special kind of twisted logic. Linda Chen wrapped an arm around Sophia. I'm so proud of how you handled that, sweetheart. You showed more maturity in 10 minutes than that woman showed in 23 years. Tyler stood quietly, still holding the trust documents in his hands. Grandma, he said finally, how long have you known about the missing money? I started suspecting something 6 months ago, I admitted. When I asked for copies of the quarterly reports, the numbers didn't match what Crystal was telling you about the trust's performance, but I wanted to be absolutely certain before accusing her. So you hired a forensic accountant, Tyler said softly. Yes, I replied. Patricia Winters, the best in the state. She's been building this case methodically for weeks. I looked at my grandson's sangria-stained dress and all. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, on your wedding day. Tyler pulled me into a tight hug. Don't apologize. You saved us from years of lies and manipulation, and you gave me back my real mother's memory. Sophia squeezed my other hand. Thank you for defending my family and for showing me what real strength looks like. As the evening wound down, several guests came over to tell me how much they admired the way I handled everything. More than a few admitted they'd sensed something was off about Crystal's stories but hadn't known how to challenge her. The way she talked about Sophia's family just didn't ring true. One elderly woman whispered to me, I've known the Chuns for years through the school district. Lovely people, but Crystal sounded so convincing with her concerns. It was a sobering reminder of how easily lies can spread when they're delivered with enough authority and fake concern. Tyler and Sophia decided to go ahead with their honeymoon as planned, though they did spend an hour on the phone with their bank and their lawyer, securing the trust fund and starting the process of recovering the stolen money. Patricia Winters assured them that between the paperwork and Crystal's recorded confession, recovering the funds should be straightforward. When I finally headed home, still wearing my sangria-stained dress, I thought about everything that had happened. It wasn't the wedding I'd hoped for my grandson, but it ended with the truth, and that might have been the greatest gift I could give them. 6 months later, Tyler and Sophia bought a lovely little house just 4 blocks from mine. They used their own savings and a modest loan, choosing to keep the recovered trust fund invested for their future children's education. Crystal pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud. She received probation and was ordered to pay full restitution. One Saturday morning, I was working in my garden when Tyler stopped by with coffee and news. The last of the money came through yesterday, he said, settling into a patio chair. Patricia says Crystal actually stole $197,000 over 3 years, not the $180,000 we originally thought. What was the extra money from? I asked. Rental income from the apartment above the garage. Apparently, she'd been collecting $1,200 a month for 2 years, and never told me. Tyler shook his head. I still can't believe how methodical she was about all of it. We sat quietly for a moment, watching the morning sun warm my rose garden. Tyler seemed calmer these days, though I knew the betrayal still hurt. Have you heard from her? I asked gently. She sends a card on holidays, he said. Short notes, mostly apologies. Says she's getting counseling. He took a sip of his coffee. I'm not ready to forgive her yet. Maybe I never will be, but I'm trying not to let her poison the good memories from when I was younger. That's very mature of you, I said. Sophia's helped a lot, he added. She keeps reminding me that Crystal did provide stability when I needed it. Even if her motives were selfish, it's complicated. I nodded. It was complicated, no matter what we knew now. Crystal had been the only mother figure Tyler remembered for most of his life. I've been thinking about Jennifer, Tyler said quietly. My real mom. I found some of her things in Dad's study photo albums, letters she wrote me before she died, even a baby book. Crystal had boxed them up and hidden them. His voice steadied as he spoke. She seemed incredible, kind, funny, completely devoted to Dad and me. Reading her letters, I finally understand why Dad was so devastated when she died, why it was so easy for Crystal to step in and take advantage of that grief. Your mother would be incredibly proud of the man you've become, I said softly, and she would absolutely adore Sophia. Tyler smiled. I think so too. Sophia's been amazing through all of this. She never once made it about herself, even when Crystal was spreading those awful lies about her family. Almost on cue, Sophia appeared around the corner of the house carrying a basket of what smelled like fresh-baked goods. I hope you don't mind, she said, setting it on the patio table. I was experimenting with your apple cinnamon muffin recipe and thought you might want to be my taste tester. By then, this had become our Saturday ritual. Sophia baked, Tyler brought coffee, and we spent an hour or two in the garden talking about everything and nothing. It was the kind of easy, loving, family relationship I'd always hoped for. Then, a year after the wedding, I received an unexpected phone call that brought the entire Crystal chapter full circle. It was Detective Williams, now retired from the police force. Mrs. Thompson, he said gently, I wanted to let you know that Crystal Patterson has asked for a meeting with you and Tyler. She's completed her court-awarded counseling and wants to do what she calls a proper amend. I stayed quiet for a moment, trying to process what I was hearing. What exactly did that mean? He explained that she wasn't asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. According to her counselor, she wanted to take full responsibility for what she'd done and share information that might help Tyler better understand his father. Information about David. Apparently, she'd come across some letters and documents that had belonged to your son. Things from his first marriage and from Tyler's early childhood that she had hidden away. She wanted to return them. I called Tyler right away, and we agreed to meet Crystal together, with Detective Williams present, at a neutral location. A week later, we found ourselves sitting in a conference room at the community center, facing a woman who looked nothing like the polished, controlling Crystal we remembered. She was thinner, quieter. Her expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple, modest attire. When she spoke, the manipulative charm that once defined her was completely absent. "Tyler," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I want to start by saying that nothing I did was ever your fault. You were a child who needed love and care, and I used that need to justify my own selfish desires." She placed a small wooden box on the table between us. "These belong to you. Inside were letters your father wrote to Jennifer before they married, photos from your early childhood, and Jennifer's jewelry pieces that were meant to be saved for your future wife." Tyler opened the box with shaking hands. Inside were dozens of letters tied with ribbon, a photo album, and a small velvet jewelry box holding what looked like an engagement ring and a wedding band. "Your father never stopped loving Jennifer," Crystal continued, tears running freely down her face. "Even after we married, he kept these things hidden in his study. I found them after he died, and I was jealous. Jealous of a dead woman's memory, so I hid them." She took a shaky breath. "I told myself I was protecting you from painful memories, but the truth is, I was protecting myself from the reality that David settled for me because he was broken by grief, not because he loved me the way he loved her." Tyler finally looked up from the letters. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because counseling taught me that love doesn't require possession or control," she said, her voice steadier now. "If I had truly loved you, I would have honored your father's memory and your mother's legacy instead of trying to erase them. I would have celebrated your marriage to Sophia instead of trying to destroy it because I was afraid of losing my financial security." Slowly, she stood. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Tyler. I'm just trying to undo as much damage as I can. You deserve to know the truth about your parents' love story, and Sophia deserved to have her wedding day be about joy, not my lies and manipulations." Then she left. Afterward, Tyler and I sat in the community center parking lot, reading David's letters to Jennifer. They were beautiful, deeply heartfelt words from a young man who had truly found his soulmate. "She was right about one thing," Tyler said quietly at last. "Dad never got over losing Mom. These letters show a man who is completely devoted to Jennifer. I can see now why it was so easy for Crystal to step into that empty space." He closed the letter he'd been holding. "I'm glad she finally told the truth, even if it took a year of court-ordered therapy to get there. What will you do now?" I asked that. Tyler was silent for a long moment. "I'm going to take these letters home and share them with Sophia. I want her to know the kind of love my parents had, because that's the kind of love I want us to have too." He looked at me, his eyes reminding me so much of David at that same age. "And I'm going to make sure our children know the truth about their grandmother. Jennifer, not the lies Crystal told, but who she really was." As we drove home, I reflected on this strange journey we'd all been through. Crystal's attempt to destroy a wedding had ultimately led to truth, healing, and a stronger family bond than we'd ever known. Sometimes, the most painful revelations are also the most necessary. Tyler and Sophia now live in their little house with baby Jennifer, named after the grandmother she never met but whose story she always know. They come to my house every Sunday for dinner, and not once have we spoken Crystal's name at the table. Some stories end with forgiveness, others end with truth, and sometimes that's enough. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.